It's quite possibly the most recognizable four notes in Western classical music. It's the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and I'm guessing you might have probably heard it a million times. Okay, perhaps a slight exaggeration. However, its familiarity is exactly why my composition professor gave me this exercise. He asked me to write down 10 to 15 things about this motif that don't use any music theory terms. Of course, we could say that it's 3 Gs and then an E flat. We could say that it's 3 eighth notes and then a half note. We could also say it's a descending major third. But that's the music theory answer. Could we see this motif with new eyes and really dig into its component parts and try to figure out what makes this motif so memorable? It's often called the fate motif, as Beethoven allegedly wrote to a friend that it was like fate knocking on his door, describing his increasing deafness. Whether or not that's true is up for debate, but it's certainly a fascinating lens to view this motif through. You see, it's not just the 4 notes, it's how those 4 notes are played. It's also the fact that no matter how we slice this motif up, it's almost always a dichotomy. We have energy, and then idleness, work, and then rest, tension, and then resolution. There's a bit of a frenzy with the 3 eighth notes, but the half note provides reprieve. There's also a silence between the opening phrase and the next phrase. But this is not a peaceful silence. It's a very tense silence. A silence with all the anxiety of what will come next. It's a silence that will leave the listener holding their breath rather than breathing a sigh of relief. Beethoven understood that there are as many colors of silence as there are of sound, and he uses some of those colors to great effect here. We also have a separation and then a sustain. The separation is very small and it goes by very quickly, but simply by virtue of them being a repeated pitch, there has to be separation. The motif is mobile yet static. We have a very powerful opening statement, but where did it really go? It was a declaration, sure, but it hasn't really gone anywhere yet. And because of that, we have an uncertainty about the time, the tempo, and the meter. Where are we? What time signature are we in? How fast is it? Were those quarter notes we heard? Were they eighth? Something else. There's 3 eighth notes. Maybe it's 6/8. Maybe we heard 3 eighths and a dotted quarter. And honestly, the second statement of the motif doesn't really answer it either. If you're just listening to the motif, you have no sense of direction. But a blank that you can fill in if you have the score is that it starts on an offbeat. There is an eighth rest before the opening eighth note, and we can also see that the half note falls on the downbeat. It also tells us what beat Beethoven wanted emphasized. There's also an uncertainty surrounding the harmony and tonality. And a lot of that is because the motif is made up of only 2 pitches. What's the key? Are we in E flat major? There was an E flat and a G. Maybe that's outlining the tonic chord. Or is it C minor? E flat and G also make up part of the C minor chord. Maybe it was the 5 in A flat major. Again, we really don't know. Because of the forceful nature of the opening, it seems much more ominous than cheerful, but still, there is that bit of uncertainty. We could also say that the motif is a microcosm of the harmony. Again, not much has been learned about the harmony from the opening 4 notes, but we very soon learn that the piece is firmly in C minor. And while the opening partially outlines the C minor triad, we could also see this motif as a reference to away and then home. Throughout the movement, this motif will take different character forms, sometimes ominous, sometimes victorious. This is made possible by the 2 main tonal centers of the first movement, C minor and E flat major. It's also a microcosm of the themes. The contrasting textures of the motif provide the contrasting characters of the 2 main themes for the first movement. We could say that the motif is frantic and then calm. By parallel, the opening theme is frantic, it's escalating, it's built mostly on the motif ascending. Meanwhile, the secondary theme in E flat major is calmer, somewhat victorious even if it is short-lived and eventually overrun by C minor again. Additionally, the secondary theme is built on the opening motif. The opening motif is also a microcosm of the form. In the classical sonata form, we have 3 main parts. The exposition, where the themes are introduced or exposed. The development, where the theme is developed. And the recapitulation, where the themes are usually repeated in their entirety. However, there is an optional 4th section of the form, and that's called the coda. This is an extension of the form. The coda can vary in length, but it's usually relatively short. For Haydn, the coda may have just been 2 or 3 statements of the 5/1 cadence to put an exclamation point on the end of the movement. Beethoven reaches the end of the typical sonata form material and then launches into a coda that is so long and complex, it might as well be a second development. Not only that, but the opening motif is a microcosm of the entire symphony. The opening motif shows up in all the other movements, which is uncommon. Typically, the motif from the first movement is only for the first movement. But Beethoven ties the entire symphony together by having all 4 movements include this motif. Additionally, the 4th movement could be seen as a coda for the entire symphony. This couldn't possibly be an exhaustive list. Scholars have been picking this piece apart for 210 years since its premiere in 1808. And perhaps you found other ways to describe this motif than the ones I listed, and I'd love to hear about them in the comments. But what I really hope from this video is that it gives you a new way of looking at the construction of motifs. I was given this exercise as a way of looking at motifs that I had written. So I'll say the same to you. If you've written a motif or a theme and you can't seem to move past it, write down 10 to 15 things about that motif that mention nothing about music theory and see if that doesn't help get you out of the rut. Maybe it just gets you past writer's block. But for me, every time I've done it, it has given me a new direction on the piece as I've learned the character of the motif more fully. So next time we'll actually look at how to write motifs and how to manipulate those motifs into phrases. Leave any questions you have in the comments and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching this episode of 2 Minute Music Theory. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe. Also be sure to check out my other channel, Jesse Strickland Music, which is home of all of my compositions. And if you're the kind of person who uses social media, feel free to connect with me there.